And welcome, welcome, welcome. You are listening to RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site, and you are listening to Warp and Woof Radio. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell, here every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the big fella's a little under the weather today. Hello, Dr. Mark.
Yeah, I got some drugs flowing through the veins, just trying to keep the sniffles down, but we will marshal through for the next 2 hours. We have great guests coming in. Matt and Estefana Jesh are coming in. We're going to be talking about cross-cultural communication.
And that is so necessary today. We're just actually getting ready for the new town hall forum in the different cultures and how mental health is affected is a major one as well, and this religion is one as well. So we have to really start understanding the other cultures and the other communities that we live with and around. So, and you are the man in doing this, Dr. Mark. Sick or not, you are the man in making sure you're going to step outside of your comfort zone and go meet different people. And then once we find out that we're, really not that much.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next Avondale group. It'll be a great time to talk about issues concerning mental health. Our family is concerned about that in particular, so we're going to have a great time there. But beyond that, we meet all kinds of different folks all the time, and different cultures are sometimes in our own home, and so we will talk about that too. I mean, we got to talk about the different cultures between genders, don't we?
Absolutely.
Between men and women.
Absolutely. But what we're going to do is we're going to take you to a little break. As we always do, start you off with a couple of these nice little musical interludes, and then we're going to come back and we're going to dive right into what's going on in the different cultures of our world. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.tv. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site, Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove dial. Right now, Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell. Each and every week, we try to combine wisdom and knowledge through the scriptures of Proverb, not religiously, but just how we can live our world using these tools that are granted by that great book. Dr. Mark Echo is the executive director, and is that
president?
President of the Comenius Institute. And tell them before we get going today, man, a little bit about Comenius.
Sure, yeah. So Comenius, we actually work with students on the campus of IUPUI, and we're helping them to make a bridge between high school and college, going down there and chatting with them about their classes, the things that they're invested in. One of the students this week told me, I think I get more out of this hour that I spend with you than I get with my classes or with Bible studies or whatever. And I honestly think it's the personableness of it, where you spend time with people.
Yeah, and what we're talking about today is so relevant in understanding what cross-cultural communication is all about. And we're going to have some great guests coming in at the 11 o'clock hour. Matt and Esther Jesh are going to come in and talk about the great works they do. But I guess in starting off this first segment, I guess the first question would be, what do we mean when we say cross-cultural communication? Seems simple.
Yeah, it seems simple, right? So I'll start with a story. Yesterday, I had my sump pump changed out. I had.
Well, you bringing back some memories. Sump pump.
I'm telling you what, man. So we got a sump pump in the basement, and I needed a new one because it wasn't working. We got spring rains coming. We don't want to mess around with having a pool in the basement. So the guys come in and they fixed the sump pump, and they said to me, "Do you want to know?" And I just cut them off. I said, "All I want to know is, does it work?" That's all I want to know. I'm a big believer in getting experts to manage my house, my car, because they know about it. I don't change my oil anymore because it costs me, $25 to go someplace to get somebody else to do it? My word, why would I want to do that, climb underneath my car any longer? My communication with folks who provide services is always the same. And I'm going to say these words over and over again today: respect and listen and gratitude. I'm always grateful. Always thank everybody for their service. And I think each one of us in our own cultures need to actually participate in this, the respect, listening, and gratitude issue. So we sometimes think and believe differently in the very people that we live with. I mean, we could talk about marriage, we could talk about friendships. They're all the same. We all communicate, that is, our interactions with each other across cultures. And by what we mean by culture is, how do people think? So how does my brother think, or my sister think about whatever it might be, and how is it different than me? And how am I going to interact with that so that, we don't tick each other off?
And one of the, I can remember about 25, 30 years ago when this no habla español starts showing up on everything. And, the Spanish language in particular was always put right next to or underneath the English language.
Right.
So, why is it important for us to learn someone else's language or for them to learn our language?
Well, when you stop to think about how many Spanish-speaking folks we have in the United States of America, apart from any discussions on immigration policy or anything like that, the issue is going to be always the same. How do I listen to somebody who doesn't speak my language, and how much love do I get to show them by actually maybe learning it? So, another story, on Saturday mornings for a long time, NPR has had a show for years called Car Chat. And you got a couple of these brothers, for years and years and years, they took all of these sounds. This is really funny. They took all the sounds that people made on the radio. They said, well, what's the car sound like, and then somebody'd go put, 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 or and they'd do some kind of weird, whacked out sound. And so they'd say, from the sound, what was wrong with the car. So learning another person's language literally demonstrates an interest. And this interest, of course, means that you got to be knowledgeable about something. There's got to be some prudence involved, some discretion, some wisdom. But we're always coming at this from a God-centered point of view. And the God-centered point of view is welcome the stranger, welcome the person that's your neighbor, welcome whomever it is that isn't like you. And that's a huge issue. That started all the way back in Leviticus. Jesus quotes Leviticus when he says, take care of your neighbor.
Wow. Now, you did go deep on me there. And because a lot of times when we bleed Old and New Testament together, it has no relevance. But in this case, absolutely. Proverbs, that's the book we always use as our center point. What does Proverbs say about communicating across cultures?
Sure. So when we talk about Proverbs, talking about communication, the words that are used in Proverbs are going to be different than the words that we use in our culture today. So we're talking about cross-cultural communication, but you won't find that phrase anywhere in the Bible. What you will, however, see are statements about the tongue, the lips, and the mouth, and ears, and other auditory and speaking parts of our bodies that communicate. So here are just a few statements about the power of the tongue from the book of Proverbs. The tongue is just as choice silver. The heart of the wicked has little worth. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. The mouth of the just brings forth wisdom, but the tongue will be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what's acceptable. The mouth of the wicked speaks forwardness, which is an important idea, that we're actually concerned with people, reaching out to them. Proverbs 11:11, by the blessing of the upright the city is exalted, but it's overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but anytime you're reading the book of Proverbs and you're seeing words like lips, mouth, and tongue, they're all talking about language and communication and how we're going to do that with each other, again, so that we actually can get along.
So before we go to break, a little nursery rhyme used to say, sticks and stones can break your bones and words will never hurt you. Arthur was a big fat liar. We're going to come right back. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell, Warp and Woof Radio. You are listening to the Cool Groove site. And RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. We are back. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell, Warp and Woof Radio, where we combine and connect wisdom and knowledge as it pertains to the book of Proverbs in our great book, the Bible. And Dr. Mark, before we left, and we want to welcome into the studio our guest that will be taking the air right around the 11 o'clock hour, Matt and Esther Jesh, and the young man, what's your name, man? Mateo is in the house with them as well, all the way up here from Mexico. So we cannot wait to hear the conversation today. We're talking about cross-cultural communication, and we were talking in the first segment, Mark, about Proverbs and how it speaks to life and the cultures. In this segment, what we want to do is talk about current events, and we want to talk about some examples of cultures that exist all around us, right here in Indianapolis and around the world. How does this cross-cultural thing work?
Yeah, so we're the two of us are different cultures. Maybe we should just start there, right?
No, man. Virginia gave birth to both of us, man. Come on.
There you go, Mom. There's your shout out today. Yeah, I think the ethnic difference is pretty obvious in the studio. Gender issues are obviously a whole nother culture. When I talk with my wife, Robin, her perspective on things is quite a bit different than mine sometimes. And then there's, of course, class cultures. I don't know if you saw any of these Super Bowl commercials where they were trying to sell Bentleys. And I'm thinking to myself, man, there's no way under God's good sun I'm going to be buying a Bentley anytime soon. But they have those Super Bowl commercials about Bentleys. You've got urban, suburban, rural. The differences between farm and city kids are unbelievable. I've had both. I've loved them all. But the farm kids, man, they make the city kids' eyes go wide when they start talking about stuff, you know. And then, of course, there's readers versus movie watchers. I was traveling someplace on a plane, and I was asking somebody about books and movies, and they said, well, we don't read. We just watch TV. Okay, well, there's that. I've got a friend down in Florida. His name is Tommy. He's a senior pastor at a very large church down at Spanish River in Boca. And he loves metal, and by that I mean he loves cars. So now cars to me just get me from point A to point B. I want something reliable. I stick the key in, it turns over, I want it to go. My friend Tommy's ripping out car engines and doing all kinds of stuff to his cars. Hey, man, go for it. You know, you're in love with metal. I appreciate that, and I love you dearly. But that's a whole different culture. You got the golf circuit. You got the tennis circuit. You've got the driving circuit. You name it, the circuit is out there. Everybody has their own culture. And let me say it again, that when we use the word culture, all we're talking about is the way that people think about life. And that culture then drives the way we live it. So how we live our lives based on how we think about life. The problem for us is that our way of thinking is so different that we might never be able to overcome the barriers presented by the way others think. So there it is. I mean, so now the great question is, how in the world are we going to get over that trespass? You know?
Leave up out of your culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we have to leave the culture that we were developed by to understand another's, understanding and why they think and act and do the things that they do.
That's right.
And be transparent when you do that. I believe
transparent. Look at
man.
you.
Yeah,
Man.
I learned a little bit by hanging with you, Dr. Mark. No, seriously, I think if we leave the culture that we know, and basically when you say culture, and if you can remember your biology class, they say we're going to put this in a culture dish, and that culture dish is just an environment where this thing will manifest itself based on the environment that's in that little dish.
Yeah.
But if you don't leave that dish, that culture is just stagnant. So we have to be better at getting out and trying to understand, and that's the reason when we start the 11 o'clock hour, we want to find out the culture of Mexico and what's going on down there as well. How do we honor someone else's culture and the communication that they have, and try to blend with what we are and who we are, Mark?
Well, I think you and I talk about this all the time, and I'm sure I've said this a time or two on air, and let me be just right down to earth. You need to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
And what I mean by shut up and listen, and I say this over and over again, that means ask questions. You got to show interest in other people. So if you're having an hour-long conversation, a 60-minute conversation with somebody, 55 of it should be listening and 5 talking. And the talking should be basically asking questions. So if you're really interested in somebody else's culture, people are not so compelled by what you have to know about my culture as they are you trying to understand my culture? So you're making an effort toward understanding me and who I am. So this week, I tell you this story. This week, an adult student contacted me. Interesting. I teach a whole bunch of different courses, and one of them I'm teaching right now is theological interpretation of media. One of the students is a very bright person. Obviously, she's got an MBA. She's a program coordinator in nursing research. I mean, this person really knows her stuff. But she said, I might have to drop the class. Well, I asked her, I said, why is it that you have to drop the class? And she said, well, I had an accident a few months ago, and I'm still dealing with the concussive issues that I'm dealing with because of that car crash. Now, if I had gone to her and said, you need to shape up, and do this thing because this is the responsibility you have, the first question I'm going to ask her doesn't have anything at all to do with that. It's going to be, what is it in your life that's holding you back from actually completing this assignment? So she sent me this email. It was a very lovely email, and I only read it to get the point across, but here it is. She wrote, my best friend is a professor at Loyola University. She said to tell you that you said what you said to me truly blessed her heart. She prays for more teachers with hearts to encourage students and go the extra mile to help them. She said she was in tears when I shared this with her. Now, I got to tell you that the reason why I honestly think that this happened was because this doesn't happen very often. So when you see it in somebody else's life, or you give space and grace to folks, this kind of stands out to people, don't you think? And people look at you and say, "Wow, look at that."
Absolutely, and you're putting tears in here, and tears mean that we have some sort of emotional tie to it. Anytime that there's a tear, there has to be an emotional tie.
Right.
You and I talk about this all the time. I am an African American man, and my culture, I love it.
Yeah.
But I understand that there's more to this life than the culture I live in. So, with that being said, how do we communicate without losing cultural commitments?
Yeah. So we live in really rocky emotional times, man. Honestly. We do not talk much about politics on this show, and I'm not going to talk about politics per se on this show today, but I want to just make an observation about the political culture in the Christian church. I am not upset with politicians. They do what they do, and they're going to make decisions about the things that they do, and I can't do anything about that. What I'm upset with are Christians and social media who cannot contain their vitriol and venom, and how they just attack each other, and how they defriend each other for simply a different point of view. My word, what is wrong with us? So I have to say, how can Christians say to one another, "I'm going to get rid of you because you believe this or you voted for this individual"? Seriously? Man, I read over and over and over again in the Bible about how we're supposed to treat each other with long-suffering, kindness, generosity, and care, and I don't see anything about defriending people on Facebook in the Bible. So, let me give just this one example, and this happens actually to be in Jesus' disciples, okay? So Jesus and his disciples, he had these two rogues in there. One of them was Matthew, who was a tax collector who worked with the Romans. Remember, the Romans were the ones with a hobnail boot, the despots who were ruling the world with an iron fist. Matthew worked for those guys. Jesus also had Simon the Zealot. Now, zealots were very well known for actually sticking a knife, an 8-inch knife, between the fourth and fifth ribs of Roman soldiers in very crowded marketplaces so nobody would catch them. Now, I got to tell you that here you have on Jesus' disciples a Roman sympathizer and a Roman hater. Let me just pause there to let that hang in the air. A Roman sympathizer and a Roman hater in Jesus' disciples. So if you all out there are listening to me and you give any credence to this at all, I'm talking to liberals, conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, union leaders, right-to-work leaders, pick a group. If you're a Christian and you act this way, I'm going to have to call you out. I'm going to have to say, what's up with that, man? Here's a good example of this. Cal Thomas and Bob Beckel are two very different guys, both of them commentators on the air. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat, one's a conservative, one's a liberal, and they are both Christians, and they both love each other. They care deeply for each other. They're very good friends. They talk about why each other is wrong, with a smile on their face, but they care about what the other person has to say, and they listen. So would you all just shut up and listen?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And that makes life just a little bit better. And as we go on this break, Mark, we've got one more question to ask you, sir. What can we do to get each other out of the comfort zone of culture?
Yeah.
It wasn't on our question list.
No,
But,
that's okay.
as you were mentioning, I'm
Yeah.
like, what can we do really to get each other outside of the
Sure.
our complacency of culture, as
Right.
we want to call it?
Well, I got to tell you that, you and I do this for each other all the time. So you invited me to the Avondale Y to be involved in the African American community discussion about various issues upcoming, of course, the health issue, mental health issue. And if I'm the kind of person that I want to be, then I'm going to go to that kind of process and be involved in that particular group because I want to listen to other people. So that's just one example. I mean, you made that available to me, and my job is to show up.
Absolutely. So we're going to come right back. We've got one more segment before we meet our great guest today. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.tv. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio, Comenius Institute-sponsored program every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, combining wisdom and knowledge up in here. And today we're talking about cultural communication.
Yes, sir, we are.
I like this too, man. No, I mean seriously, man. Our world would be just a much better place if we would learn that we're just really not that different. We just grew up in, in different locations and different themes around the world that we grew up in. Before we get to our great guest, Matt Netajeshin here, and all the way from Mexico, man.
That's right.
So we're going to talk to them about the cultural differences between the Mexican community and what they deal in and what's happening here in America, and see if we have some relevance. And we have Mateo in the house, and we're glad that he's here. Sixth grader in the house. I know all about you, little man. I've worked with some young brothers and sisters your age, and I'm telling you, the culture wouldn't make that much difference between that 13, 12, 11-year-old population. I mean, they are eager and aggressive. But the last segment, as we always do, we try to find out how we're going to connect the Christian community and the topic matter. And so the first question we have are, who are some of the Christian individuals and groups that are committed to cross-cultural communication, Mark?
Yeah, so there's one website that everybody ought to check out. It's called respectfulconversation.net. That's respectfulconversation.net. And it's headed up by Harold He, that's spelled H-E-I-E. He's done some really fantastic work in higher education, but basically he's just saying to everybody, hey, let's sit around a table and talk to each other. That might be kind of nice. Then there's another group called the Evangelical Chapter of the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy. Say that really fast. Evangelical Chapter for the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy. And my friend John W. Moorhead out in Salt Lake City, Utah, heads that up and does great work connecting folks with other cultures. He does this especially posting on things like Islam and how Christians should be interacting with and investing with the culture of Islam. And then, of course, our neighbors to the north, the Canadians, we want to give a shout out to Cardus, which is that's Cardus, CARDUS.ca. That's for Canada, CARDUS.ca. And they have a great magazine. It's one of the magazines that I love to read cover to cover. I hardly ever read everybody's stuff cover to cover, but I do for them. They do great work interacting with all kinds of universal issues that everybody faces and then tries to get people to talk about it. How about that? So every single guest on our show, in one way or another, has crossed cultures to do what they do. I think about Nate Hershey, for instance, Young Life, so his focus on City on Wheels was really powerful and important down in East Washington, where he's taking disadvantaged guys off the street, teaching them how to deal with how do I fix cars. So he has to straddle life between sponsors who may not be Christians, but who believe in his ministry. So he lives in the Indianapolis 500 community. All kinds of folks want to give good things and give money to things that help in the community, but the folks who give might not all be believers. Well, gee, how am I going to actually walk that line as a Christian in communicating with other people? And we find out that he does such a really great job at that. So there's just some, we could talk about every single guest, like I said on the program. We could say something about what they've done.
Well, that's why they get to come on this program.
That's right.
Because they are doing something. And it's wise that we recognize the fact that everybody that we deal with and all the people that we might have to encounter in this world we live in will not be believers or believe in the same faith that you believe in. And I don't think it's our job or our responsibility where if you're not a Christian, I'm not dealing with you.
Well, exactly.
And too many times, though, as Christians, we limit ourselves to the glory of understanding who somebody might be or the greatness that they might be able to put into the lives of our community by being, negligent to want to accept someone else's viewpoints and cultures. And since we're talking about readings, what have you been reading about culture and communication to understand these issues, Mark?
Sure. So I'll tell you that I sent this to my daughter, Chelsea, over in Defiance, Ohio. It's actually an article entitled "There's No School Like the Kitchen." And the subtitle is "Cooking Helps Kids Learn, Appreciate Different Cultures, and Refine Their Motor Skills." I sent this to her because our granddaughter, Marilyn, loves to cook. She loves to be invested in the kitchen. Anytime Arlie, that's Robin's grandmother name, goes up there, there's always some kind of cooking going on, and Marilyn wants to be invested in that. So we're talking about culture. We're talking about the kitchen. The same thing goes on. I teach a world literature class right now of juniors in a homeschool group. And these last 3 weeks, we have discussed Confucius, Bhagavad Gita, and this coming week we're going to be talking about Sun Tzu and the Art of War, which is, I love that book actually. And the Sun Tzu and the Art of War book, we're going to cross over between business and warfare principles, because that book is being used constantly in various contexts, especially in business communities. And then on my trip this next week, I won't be on air. Jim Strudelmeyer will be taking my place this coming week. But on my trip down to Houston, I'm going to be taking with me Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me. And I'm looking forward to that, reading his book, because, of course, I'm trying to expand my own cultural understanding of what does it mean to be an African-American man in this particular culture. I'm actually working on a paper right now about culture and film, which I'll be presenting down in Houston. So these are just some of the ideas. I mean, I could go through and talk about this all day long, HB, but that kind of gives a summary anyway of what I'm talking about.
Well, you could ask a brother how what it's like to be an African American.
We talk about that all the time, man.
Going all the way out of town to find out what brothers feel about being an African American.
Here we go.
And I'm right here. But now, as we end this first segment, before we get to our great guest, this is your part. As far as understanding cross-cultural communication, you are the movie buff.
Yep.
If people don't understand, Dr. Mark does a lot of his educational teachings through using film, especially Gothic horror film. Correct?
True.
That's your passion. So what kind of documentaries or movies are out there to get us to better understand cross-cultural communication?
Sure. So let's see, a couple weeks from now, I'll actually be going out to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I'll be doing the residency part of the course I just mentioned, Theological Interpretation of Media. And I've been showing the last couple times I've done this course two movies on immigration issues. They're entitled Frontera and A Better Life, and they're two apolitical films. That is, there's no political statement really being made in them. It's just about the difficulty of the immigration issue and immigrants themselves and folks coming from Mexico through our southern borders. And so we're going to have this conversation with the folks in that particular class to talk with them about what does this actually mean in their context. I just want to mention a few other movies. These all have to do with cross-cultural communication, and they are all rated 7 or above on IMDb, the International Movie Database. And for those who don't know, 7 or above is pretty much a really good score. If you want to see some really good films, then go watch these. Here are 3. One is called The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. The Last Samurai, where here's a Western warrior who becomes an Eastern warrior and becomes literally a samurai. Really a fine film in many respects. And then there's another film called Babel, just spelled as you might think of it, as out of Genesis 11, Babel, which came out right after 9/11, which is a very powerful film about different cultures and folks invested in those cultures and how do we get along. Title again is Babel. And then one other, and there are tons of these, but one other, my man Clint Eastwood. I love Clint Eastwood films. Gran Torino. Talk about here's an old white guy living in Detroit when we've got some Korean neighbors, and now what are we going to do when push comes to shove? Are you going to gang up on those neighbors? Are you going to defend them and protect them? And I think we all know what Clint's going to do.
Oh, yeah. Harry didn't get dirty for no reason.
That's right, exactly.
Absolutely. Before we go to break, Mark, the fear. What do you think the big fear is about wanting to learn another's culture? Because really it's a phantom of fear after we really get down to it.
Yeah, I think it's an issue of rejection. None of us wants to be rejected. All of us want to be loved. I wrote about this yesterday on Warp and Woof. The famous Hebrew word here is chesed, which means covenant loyalty. So nobody wants to be rejected. Nobody wants to fall out of favor. Everybody wants to be accepted. And when you're not accepted, that's a big problem for us. So I'd say that's probably the essence of it, to answer your question.
Wow. Okay, we're going to come right back, and we're going to introduce you to a great couple here. from the United States, I take it, and moved down to Mexico. And now we're going to find out about the culture of Mexico. Matt and Etta Jesh are going to be on the program, and we cannot wait to hear their take on what culture is like and how we can do cross-cultural communication. Please stay tuned. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell.
You're listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday morning from 10 till noon, and we have fantastic, fabulous guests that you never want to miss. And this week, we have Matt and Etta Jesh, and they are all the way here from Guadalajara, Mexico, just for this program. No, I'm kidding.
It's partly true.
That's right, just for you, Mark.
Just for me, yeah, right. So they're spending 2 months here in the States, talking with their supporters and so on. But let's get right to it, you guys. Welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself, your family, your experiences, whatever you want to talk about.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us on the show.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good.
Well, I grew up in a big family. Got 4 sisters and a brother, and I was homeschooled all my life. Grew up in a Christian home. And so then I went to college and met my wife. But my goal in life in college was to be an entrepreneur and live the quote-unquote American dream, so to speak. Big house, I wanted to live on a lake, have a boat, and just enjoy life, take care of my wife and kid. And so that's what I set out to do, and God had other plans. And he quickly changed me. Well, I shouldn't say quickly. It was over a course of about it was a long journey over a course of about 8 years. But God called us to the mission field, and so we're serving in Guadalajara, Mexico now.
That's great. Yeah. So you want to add to that, Esther? You want to
Well,
reframe
I did not.
anything
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's funny how God brings 2 people together that are completely opposite of each other. But I didn't really want the American dream. I didn't want any of that. We went to Taylor University, and I went on a mission trip to Guatemala while I was studying there. And in January of 1995, I just remember so vividly getting a call to the mission field. And I knew that I was going to be a missionary at some point in my life. I didn't know what it was going to look like or how or when. But met Matt, and we got married, and he kind of was hoping that was just a phase I was going through. And
It wasn't kind of. I was hoping
Yeah.
that was a phase. So
But
this will go away.
as you could see, God just kept growing that desire in my heart to serve him on the foreign mission field. And so it, like he said, it was a process. It was a process of God changing Matt's heart towards missions, but also me, and learning how to pray for my husband, and me, and learning how to wait and pray for the Lord's plan to unfold in our lives. So yeah, we've been now in Guadalajara for 2 years, and it's good. We love it. It's hard. Missions is hard, but it's also very rewarding, and we love it.
That's great. Yeah, Matt, I wanted to come back to you for a second to ask this question, not about the American dream so much, but, I mean, you've got skills, man. So,
does.
skills, because you're a builder, you're a carpenter, that entrepreneurial aspect of you. Tell us a little bit about those giftings that God has given to you and why they're so powerfully important to you.
That's an interesting question. It's God has given me the gift of working with my hands, and that came mostly from my grandfather. And he was a hard worker. He always had us as kids working out in his yard. He was a master gardener, and so we worked out in the yard with him, and he taught us hard work. He taught us how to work hard and be diligent, and but he was an avid fisherman. And so our reward, kind of, so to speak, was if we worked with him in the yard, then he'd take us fishing.
Oh, that's
And
great.
so that's where I got my hard work and, kind of developed a skill set with working with my hands. But the Lord just has really blessed me over the years, being able to be a builder and construction, both commercial and residential.
So you had a company here in Indy, right?
I did. I actually started 2 different companies.
Okay.
And the Lord saw fit to take each one of them away
Okay.
in His providence, and but that was all part of my challenge and my growing in Him. to actually step out in faith and be called to the mission field. Otherwise, I would have never have done it.
But at the same time, you were given some time to have those experiences in the building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which, have obviously made a difference.
Right. Yeah. We weren't. We didn't go to the mission field until 4 years ago.
Okay.
Right.
And so at that time, I was already 36 years old. So I had spent almost 20 years just in the construction industry,
Yeah.
both doing mechanical engineering, which is what I went to school for, and then just starting entrepreneur businesses on my own.
And Esther, you said you went to Taylor University.
Yes, we did.
So-
yes. I graduated from Taylor. Matt did not graduate from Taylor, but I did.
Okay, so what was your field of study at Taylor?
I studied education, so I had the amazing privilege of teaching at Heritage Christian School in Indianapolis, Indiana for 13 years before going to the mission field. And the Lord really used that experience in my life, that opportunity to grow my heart for missions in a way that my students were my mission field. And even teaching at a Christian school, people think, oh, Christian school, those kids got it all together. And I have amazing students that I still keep in touch with and have great relationships with today. But they are human beings, and they had needs and were hurting. And it was awesome to be able to work there and minister to them.
And tell us what it was that you taught there.
I taught various things throughout the 13 years, but I spent 1 year teaching first graders, which was great, but the Lord moved me on from first grade and elementary because that just really wasn't my thing. But, the majority of my teaching time was in the middle school. I taught 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. Like regular 5th grade classes, I taught Bible, science, math, that sort of thing. But the majority of the time I taught 7th grade Spanish, 7th and 8th grade Spanish, which I really, really enjoyed. And it really was a great platform into further language learning so that we can communicate better
There you go.
in our current setting. Yes.
And is Spanish your first language?
Spanish is not my first language. English is my first language. But Spanish has always been a part of my life because my dad's family is from Mexico.
There you go.
And so, which is another reason why I feel like the Lord put in my heart just a love for the Mexican culture. So
Nice.
I'm half Mexican, so
There you go.
and just I've always had a desire to be way more proficient in speaking Spanish.
Nice.
Yes.
So let's keep that language question going, Matt. For you, what was the obviously Spanish is not your first language.
No.
No.
It's
So
not.
tell us a little bit about what it took for you to learn Spanish.
Oh. Well, I'm still learning Spanish.
Yes,
Yes.
right.
It's a process. For me, it doesn't come easy. And so when we first joined Mission to the World, they asked us to go to Bogota, Colombia, to learn the language and to learn the culture. And when I arrived, I knew a few words, basic words, and it was very frustrating. I spent about 8 months going through culture shock, which really just, you don't know which way is up and which way is down. And it's very confusing. Emotionally, you're all over the place. And but the process of learning Spanish has just been one where I have to constantly challenge myself, constantly push myself, because my natural tendency is to just quit. And when it gets hard, throw in the towel, and I don't want to do this anymore. It's too difficult. But yeah, I enjoy the language. I love the language, but it's difficult for me to learn it.
Yeah. As educators, we know that learning content, learning grammar, learning the baseline ideas of any particular culture is best done when kids are little. Would that have been well? Just for the sake of knowledge here, talk about the difference between how you have learned the language and Mateo, your son, has learned the language. Just for fun.
Yeah. Well, Mateo's 13 now, and when we left to go to the mission field, he was 9.
Yes.
And so he struggled with it for sure, but he spent very little time in a formal classroom setting learning the language. His was more just interacting with kids his age, and his brain just soaked it up like a sponge.
Yes.
And so he didn't I don't think he could really even articulate the time that he felt that he was fluent. But already in 4 years, he's fluent. And people in Mexico say, oh, he speaks better than we do. Or, he has no accent, which is a compliment.
Wow.
And for me, I still struggle. And here I've been very intentional about having one-on-one tutoring, going to classes, spending time just trying to learn the language, spending time with people. And so it's just a challenge. And especially when you get to be an adult, your brain is so filled with other things. And, you'd have your job and you have your family, you have everything that you're worried about. And so to fill that space again with a new language and trying to learn everything new it's a difficult process. So, it's very daunting. And so if you can teach your kids at a young age a second language, they will be miles ahead of everybody.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
There it is. The commercial for everybody
That's
to
right.
teach their kids when they're young, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we got to get those educational hard knock things in there. Yeah, that's a pretty important, impressive issue. Well, before we go to break, this thing is this question that I have for you really kind of came out of our lunch discussion when we were together, and you both told these hilarious stories about the first time you met each other's families over dinner. So for everybody's sake, please take whoever wants to go first. Tell the stories about meeting each other's families over dinner for the first time.
Well, I can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
I already mentioned that my dad's family is from Mexico. My mom's family is from the United States, but I didn't really grow up knowing her side of the family. So my whole upbringing was all Mexican. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, everyone. So I grew up knowing the food and just speaking words in Spanish. We didn't speak fluent Spanish, but, words. It's just a different culture living in the United States. And so we're very loud. We're very kind of crazy family. And I just can't really remember sitting down at the table together, eating a meal or anything like that. It was just tons of people, everybody all over the place. It was like a big family reunion all the time, which has its advantages as well. Well, when I met Matt, I was fairly new Christian. I became a Christian when I was 18, went away to Taylor University, a Christian university, was learning about God and Jesus and the Bible. For the first time ever, I was invited to his family's house for dinner, and I'll never forget, he has 5 siblings, and they're all sitting at the table, and they're all being just polite and, passing food around, and everybody's having a conversation, and the dad's sitting at the head of the table and the mom's at the other end, and people are serving each other, and this was a very foreign concept to me. And I remember his dad at one point got out the Bible and started to read from the Bible and did like a short devotional from the Bible, and everybody sat there listening like good little children. And I was like, where am I and what is going on? And so actually I had to excuse myself and go to the bathroom, and I cried. I cried because I was overwhelmed with this beautiful picture of a family that I've never really seen before. And I don't want it to sound like that my family wasn't loving, because they were. And they are, but it was just a very different sort of picture of a family functioning in a way that I had never seen before. And I did not know how to behave in that setting. I did not know what to do, and I felt extremely uncomfortable. But interestingly, I felt like that's what I wanted as well. I just wasn't, I was in culture shock. I was experiencing culture shock for the first time ever, because I didn't know how to process how I was feeling. Okay. So I cried in the bathroom.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, Matt, it's your turn, man.
That's right. How do I follow that up? No, like my wife said, her family is very different. And so the first time that I went to her house, she has 4 brothers. And so right there, I was scared out of my mind. Not knowing what these guys were going to think of me. But I remember going into her house, and at that time her parents were split, and so it was just her mom. But it's a very tiny house, not a whole lot of room. And when we went in there, it was just packed with people. And so there wasn't really anywhere to sit, so I found a little corner, and I just sat there, and I didn't say a word. But I just watched, and it was overwhelming for me because, I was intimidated already by her brothers to begin with, which they're all great guys. But in the Mexican culture, smiling is not a big thing. And so it's just kind of straight-faced, and you don't know what people are really thinking. And one of her brothers played football in college. He was a big guy. Another one, two of her brothers, her older brothers, both rode Harleys. Yeah. And so there's a certain stigma that comes with Harley riders, and so I just felt super intimidated. Mm-hmm. But then her mom, watching my wife and her mom interact, they would be talking 1 second, and then the next second they're yelling at each other. And I'm just like, where am I? Am I in the Twilight Zone, or what is going on? And the next minute they're telling each other, "Oh, I love you," and they're hugging. And I'm like, this is weird. This is too much. But it was a culture. It was a different culture, mm-hmm. and it was one that I'd never really experienced. And so, for me, I just kind of froze. And just kind of locked up. And I remember I sat there and I probably didn't say a word for...
I don't think you did either.
For probably a couple hours or longer. And I didn't dare move, because if I moved, I'd lose my seat. And then you're stuck. You're standing up against a wall or something like that. So, yeah.
Oh, my word.
Very different.
I'll tell you, folks, anybody who's listening or those who are going to follow this on the podcast, we talked about this in the first hour. Cross-cultural communication has to take place even in homes, and between genders, and between families. So you don't have to move to another country to have this happen to you. This is something that happens to us all the time. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend 25 minutes thereabouts with Matt and Esta talking about some very important questions concerning cross-cultural communication. You are listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site, Warp and Woof Radio. And you are back at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday morning from 10 until noon. And we are really glad today to have Matt and Esta Jesh here with us to talk about cross-cultural communication. We spent the first hour talking about some important questions, and now we have some great questions for our guests who are here from Guadalajara, Mexico, and they are talking with their supporters over the next couple of months, as well as seeing family and all kinds of cool stuff. Mm-hmm. So here's the next question. Explain why cross-cultural communication is important in someone's home or even in a neighborhood.
Start.
Well, in our context and what we do, our job really is to get to know people, get to know their needs, get to know their lives, their families, that sort of thing, and just really work with them and helping them in any way that we can. So for us, in our context, as missionaries, if we cannot communicate with people, essentially we have no job. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that we learn to communicate, because we need to be able to listen and hear their needs, which we know their greatest need is Jesus, but beyond that as well, because building relationships, especially in the Latin American culture, is very, very important. And so one way in which we do that is we need to observe and learn. We need to be lifelong learners of a culture, definitely of the language. That's one way of communicating. But we believe that learning someone's language and their culture go hand in hand. You can't learn a language without knowing their culture, and vice versa. It just doesn't work. And we have seen many missionaries fall out and burn out because they're not willing to learn and adapt to a new culture. They might know the language, but they cannot adapt to the culture. And so you got to learn that. And that's very important. So for us, when we're talking about cross-cultural communication, how important it is literally essential to what we do. And it changes, just like in the United States where we live, it changes home to home, their culture. and how they communicate to one another. It's just like here in the United States. So it's important that we learn that. And like I said before, one way in which we do that is we have to listen and observe. That's really important to what we do. Part of our job is we receive interns for the summer. And one thing we love to do with our interns, something that we learned in our cross-cultural training, is to do ethnographies. We have our interns do ethnographies, and that is literally where we strategically place them in a location around the city and have them sit and observe what they see, what they hear, what they smell. Sometimes we'll say, okay, order a coffee, order food or something, describe what you're tasting in that as well. Because there's so much to learn from the culture. And that will help you to be able to communicate with the people that live in that culture.
Well, you just mentioned like the cultural, there's so much culture, but then there's subgroups within the culture. Subcultures. So there's food, there's sports, there's the way we interact with people. There's outside of business, there's the way you interact at your home. It's totally different. And so in order to really learn about people or get to know people, you have to understand their background. You have to understand their culture. And like you mentioned in the first hour, Mark, you know, if you're having an hour-long conversation, you're trying to get to know somebody and understand their culture, well, you need to shut up. And 50,
you got to listen.
You know, 55 minutes of it needs to be you listening.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard. That's hard for a lot of people to do. And it's something that you really have to train yourself to do. But people know, too, and this is so interesting to me, people know when you're being real and when you're fake.
Yeah.
And they can see right through you. And so if you're just talking over them or you're not really that interested in them and you allow them just a little bit of time to talk, they know that you're not really invested. And depending on the culture, you may have just shut them off permanently. So for instance, with us in Mexico, you can offend someone very easily without even knowing it. And so you really need to just observe. You need to listen. And so when we went to Bogota, Colombia, we lived there for a year and a half doing training. But I was integrated into the church leadership. And I would go to the church meetings once a week, and they would last from anywhere from 4 to 6 hours.
Oh.
But it was a cultural thing, too, because we always ate together before the meeting, and then we had the meeting. But I remember for probably almost a year, I never said anything during the meetings unless I was specifically asked a question. Otherwise, I just sat and I watched. And I watched how they interacted with each other. I watched how they dealt with conflict. I watched how they dealt with social issues that were coming into the church that they needed to deal with. And so it was a learning process for me to really understand their culture, to understand where they were coming from.
This is such an important idea, and I want to just say the word again for everybody. The word is ethnography. So you're really interested in somebody's ethnicity, that is where they've come from, their neighborhood, but then you're going to actually invest in talking about it, or in the ethnography, the last part of the word there emphasizes this written concept. So it was really cool when we were talking over lunch with you guys last week about how ethnography has really become pretty much an important tool. Now, you said that when you had interns coming down, you had them do this kind of thing. Tell us a little bit more about that, because frankly, that's really a fascinating event, where you make people go and do this.
Yeah.
Well, we have such big hearts about in being a part of instilling in the next generation a heart for missions, but also other cultural groups. We think that that's very, very important, and God has put that passion in our hearts. So when our interns come, and no matter how long they are with us, some we have for a couple weeks, some we have for 2 months, or however long, we invest in them, and we invest in their learning process. We invest more than just, we really need your help with this to get this done, because we're just hoping to be a part of instilling them a passion for missions and for other people. And so the idea of the ethnography came from our training that we received as missionaries. And it's interesting because our interns loved it. They loved it because it was so exciting for us to hear their observations. We would bring them back together. How many ever, there are at that time, we would bring them back together and to hear, we would have them essentially in the same location, but in different spots, okay? And we would give them a specified amount of time. They are to take notes, just little notes as they're sitting and observing. And their observations, it's insane how different they would observe essentially the same thing, the same thing that they're looking at or whatever. But you realize as it's being processed through different people's minds, not everybody sees everything the same. And that's the whole point, right, of doing that. And so it's been an unbelievable tool for us as well as missionaries to learn. We're learning from our interns as well. What are you seeing? Because sometimes we miss things, and we're still learning. We've only lived in Mexico for 2 years. We want to be lifelong learners and grow. And so their observations about what they're seeing and observing from the culture is very important to us because we live there full time. So we want to learn, continue to learn about the culture.
Yeah, I think when you grow up in a situation in a culture, a specific culture, so suburban culture, and as a college kid, you get comfortable and you don't even really think about your surroundings. You don't think about why you do certain things or how you react to certain things. And so to get them down there and to say, okay, we want you to learn about the people that you're ministering to. And the best way you can do that is just to sit and watch and be quiet and observe everything from down to the little smells, and those things tell you something. And even if you're sitting on a corner and you observe, why I haven't seen a school bus forever. Well, here in America, you see school buses all the time. It's second nature. We don't think about it. But down there, it's a security issue, so you're not going to find a school bus in Guadalajara. And so those types of things, to get to understand a different culture to where you can actually begin to relate, you can actually begin to, what we deem as weird and just is just weird is normal for them. But is it wrong? No. Yeah. It's just a different culture, and we got to learn about it. We got to learn what's behind it.
The way people live, that's what culture means, and how, of course, people think. The way they live is important as well. We talked a little bit during our meeting last week about this phrase, incarnational theology. Tell us why it's important in your Mexican context.
There's several reasons. We were actually just discussing this morning, but the idea that Jesus came down as man and lived amongst us. And he experienced pain, he experienced hunger, he experienced all the things that we go through as a society, as human beings. And so he relates to us, and we can relate to him in a very intimate, very personal relationship. And so that plays over into the culture down in Mexico, amongst the Mexican people. And we were actually talking about that at a Bible study that we had, and just how, we were talking about, well, how does God relate to us? If God is our Lord and Savior and he reigns over all, but how can he relate to me if I'm hungry or if I don't have any money or if I'm struggling, with temptation? And yet he came down on the earth. And so being that incarnational theology relates and helps us explain to them, well, God came down on earth. He was born. He lived the human life. And so he experiences those things. He knows how you're feeling. And so you can give that over to him. The culture down there with Roman Catholicism is a very dark Roman Catholicism. It's mixed with voodoo and witchcraft. And
so it's very impersonal.
It's very impersonal, to where they don't mention the Bible. It's just whatever the priest tells you. And so a lot of people that we talk to, after they understand who Jesus is, they come alive. And again, there's people that don't want to hear anything about it, but the people that do, they just come alive because it's brand new for them. They're just hearing about it for the first time. And so it's very important.
That's great stuff.
You add to it?
Yeah, that's the importance of incarnational theology. And just for everybody who's listening, the idea of incarnation means in flesh. So incarnational theology means that you're with people. I don't talk about witness much anymore. I talk about withness. You have to be with people in order to actually play out what Jesus did for us, that is, come to meet us where we are, not expect us to be at a certain place or believe certain things. You just take people as they are, and that's the huge issue, of course. So this next question I have is about listening again, and tell us a story about why it's so important to listen to people.
Well, one thing that comes to my mind right away is, when you're not listening, what are you doing? You're talking. and so, you can miss a lot of things if you're just talking and you're not listening to a person. And so there's a pastor that we know of that, we've had interactions with, but he tends to talk a lot. And he misses what the people are really trying to tell him. And sometimes the people are getting frustrated with him, and so they come and they talk to us and say, well, the pastor's not listening to me.
We can't talk to him. He doesn't listen.
Yeah.
Is exactly what they have said to us.
And he's very genuine. He's very caring and loving
very
person.
Kind.
But he tends, listening is not a strength for him. And he hasn't really grasped how to really listen to people. And I think we as Americans, too, we struggle with that. A lot of people, that's a huge issue, is just learning how to listen. It's something that we have to develop because it can really get us into trouble.
Yeah. We have a tendency to talk first, don't we, in those
We do.
If we listen at all. If there's any listening going on at all.
Yeah.
I think that's why it was so important for God to mention in the Bible, be slow to speak, right?
Yeah, there you go. That's that whole thing. Yeah, so the issue of listening, this keeps coming up all through these 2 hours here, and certainly our friends from Mexico are emphasizing the same thing. But I want to shift gears back now to you guys coming back and your experiences in cross-cultural communication and the kind of pressures that you feel coming back to the States after having been gone. What have you encountered in that way?
We've already mentioned the word culture shock, and culture shock is very important in the lives of missionaries and expats who move to other countries because of their jobs and things like that. It's a word that we toss around a lot, but it's very serious to us. And so essentially what it means is just experiencing all different kinds of emotions, feelings, things you cannot describe. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes you cry, sometimes it's loneliness, sadness, whatever, because you are now in a place that feels very foreign to you. So you feel all these different things. You don't know how to communicate. Like when we went to Colombia for the first time, my husband, for the first 8 months, because he really could not speak Spanish, he felt like he lost his identity. He didn't know who he was and just really struggled. He cried a lot, that sort of thing. You would think that when we come back to the United States, after having lived out of the United States for 4 years now, coming back, we would feel at home and we would feel like, oh, this is normal to us now. Everybody speaks English, so we should fit right in. But we experience what's called reverse culture shock now. We're so used to our setting in Latin America and have gotten used to that, even though we still experience, little bouts of culture shock here and there and frustrations. Coming back, it's like all reverse now, because now we are these different people than we were before we left. We have these different experiences, and people here don't understand us because they don't have the same experiences. We haven't shared that. So, for example, I will never forget the first time I came back. It was 3 years after having lived out of the United States, I believe.
Yeah, I believe so.
And it was the first time I had gone to Target. Now, I live in a big city in Mexico. I live in Guadalajara, and it's a big city, so we have stores. It's not like I'm, I don't have access to things or whatever, but stores there are very different, and we don't have as many options to choose from, and it's just different. Shopping there is different. And so we came back here, and I went to Target, And I felt so completely overwhelmed in Target. I felt like all at once, all these different emotions and feelings just rushed over me. And so I felt like I got to have everything in Target, because I'm like, I will never be at Target again is how I felt. It's like when you experience culture shock, it's the extreme of your emotions. And so I felt like I got to have everything. But then I realized it's so overwhelming that I can't get anything because I want to take everything with me. I have one suitcase. How am I going to take all this back? I mean, I started to essentially have a panic attack and freak out. And the interesting thing is the things that I would normally buy from Target are like soap and shampoo and like things I can get in Mexico. So it's not like, but it was just really strange feeling of being in Target where I was normally all the time when I lived in the States and never really felt, pressures to like buy anything or whatever. But it was a really strange feeling for me. I was feeling reverse culture shock in my own country because I was so overwhelmed with the number of options that were available, the choices that I had, looking at everything and thinking, I'm never going to be in this place again, which was a total exaggeration, but and just feeling like at that point in time I had to have everything. So I go to my husband. I have tears in my eyes, and I said, I'm so overwhelmed, we have to leave. So literally we left and bought nothing because it was too overwhelming for me.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think even last night, it was interesting because we went out to eat last night and
For
had
Valentine's
to do some stuff at the mall, and so we're like, well, we'll just stop at the restaurant and eat at the restaurant. And as I started looking at the prices of things,
sticker shock.
I had sticker shock, but it was like an overwhelming, like I didn't know if I should leave or if I should stay because this is normal, normal price or whatever it was. And, you start to get anxious and you start to just get overwhelmed with everything. And so we stayed and we had a great dinner. But, it's just before we had gone and moved out of the country, I would probably not have thought twice about that. Knowing we're going to go out to eat, I know how much we're going to spend, and not a big deal. And so just the differences now that we're kind of used to and then coming back is a challenge, and it's hard. And you start to get worked up over it when you really shouldn't. I mean, we have some teammates that they have a large family, and they don't come back to the States as a family because literally they cannot afford groceries. And
in
the States,
yes.
because of what they've gotten used to down in Mexico and how their family eats, they budgeted very closely for that. And so to come back and do that in the States, they can't do that. And so just the father or just the mother come at different times. So, yeah, it's very different.
It fascinates me to think about the kinds of things that people all around us are probably experiencing in this culture. And we don't really think about that much because we're really kind of consumed by our own lives. And we don't really think about, hey, is this really bothersome to somebody else for whatever reason it might be?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, these kinds of discussions are really huge, and I knew that we would probably run out of time, so we've got about 5-6 minutes left. Well, tell us specifically, I think this is a really powerful, important question. What is your greatest need in Mexico? What is it that you would say, to an American audience, hey, this is what it is, we absolutely have to have fill in the blank? What would you say?
Well, it's I was speaking with a pastor, and I asked him that question. I said, what is it, and again, I'm trying to understand his culture, trying to understand how we can be most effective. And I asked him that. I said, what is it that you need the most? And what I expected him to say was money, because normally that's the first answer. I expected him to say more material in Spanish, because it's very difficult to get a large amount of theological, solid material in Spanish. But what he said to me caught me off guard, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said to me, I need people to come here and live out Jesus amongst the people. I need them to invite them in their home and show them what it means to love. And that never left me. Will always stick with me, is that it's about the relationship. And you touched on that a little bit earlier. It's the relationship. It's living out your lives, being real, being transparent, and letting people see that we're not perfect. We're all sinners. But at the same time, setting that example of loving others in a different culture, in a different setting.
Yep. There it is.
Generally speaking, in Latin America, it takes quite a bit of time that you have to invest to really get to know someone, because there's that, that wall of trust that needs to be broken down in order for you to really get into someone's lives. So that's why long-term missions we think is really important, because people start to respect you and you start to gain their trust the longer you live amongst them and the longer you're with them and the more you become like them. So for example, people are always surprised that we don't come, quote, home for Christmas, that we stay there, because a lot of the expat community, they will leave during Christmas time and they'll go home to their families. Well, we tell people this is our home and we're with our family here in Mexico, and that gains their trust and their respect. They love that and they're always surprised by that. And so with that, the point of me saying that is they really need to see people that are modeling what it means to live out Jesus and love Jesus. And in order for them to see that, you start to break down those walls that are, kind of hindering them from really seeing how you live as well. And I have one friend in particular that I have spent quite a lot of time with in the past 2 years. And one of the things, she's just slowly started to reveal her life to me and tell me things about her life. And one of the things that she has told me is, which is all glory to God, but she says, I love watching how you live your life, and that's what we do as people, right? She talks about my relationship with my husband, and she has said that has affected my relationship with my husband, and how we raise our child and that sort of things. We're definitely not perfect in those areas, but they watch. And so that's what we need is people who will model that and work at breaking down the walls. And so that people will respect and trust what we're trying to do, and that way they will learn by example. Yeah. That's what we do. We learn by example.
It sure sounds like this is very simple in the baseline ideas, namely that we're just talking about people and time.
Exactly.
Spending time with people.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So those are the kinds of things that I think are really important and powerful for everybody to get a hold of, that this is not rocket science. You don't have to go to seminary for this. This isn't something you have to go take a class, though classes, obviously, if you're going to learn a language or a culture, obviously have great impact.
Yes.
But as we're closing out this hour, why don't you leave us with closing thoughts or final ideas that you want to communicate?
Well, I had one right off the top of my head, and you and HP were talking about it in the beginning hour about, I think HP asked the question, what can we do to learn other cultures? And just as we just said, it's not rocket science. It's inviting people into your home and not being afraid that they're different. And getting to know them, understanding who they are. And that is where you're going to learn about their culture. That's where you're going to learn about who they are. And so I would really challenge you, if you don't know another culture, or you want to know another culture, or you don't know your neighbor very well, ask them to come over. Go for a cup of coffee, get to know. Just sit down and have a conversation. And that will break down barriers, break down walls, and give you the insight that you need into another culture.
There you go.
And I would just add, don't be afraid. I mean, you guys were talking about that in the first segment as well. The word fear came up, and I remember us feeling fear so many times. And I'm not just talking about security fear. I'm talking about fear to speak because it's not going to be perfect, or fear of getting into somebody else's culture, Just how many times does God say, don't be afraid in the Bible, Don't be afraid, don't fear, just do it. Because blessings come from that. Blessings abundantly flow from that.
Well, Godspeed on your travels, all three
Thank
of you,
you.
as you go about doing your work here for these next 2 months, and then, of course, as you go back home to Mexico. There,
yes,
I said
thank
it. Go
you.
back home
I know.
to Mexico.
We're
there
excited.
That's good.
Thank you.
You are listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday morning from 10 until noon. And next week, I am on my way to Houston, Texas to present some papers at a conference. And our good friend Jim Striedelmeyer will be up here in the house. Yeah, the shy one. No way. Jim Striedelmeyer is anything but shy. But he's taking over for me next week. The week after that, we are going to be talking about gentrification in the city. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio, and we'll see you next time.